Yeah, I think it's really powerful to look at how design impacts the world around us, and to kind of what we were saying about kind of inspiring hope, like refusing to give up and having it takes all of those different types of projects and industries to really do that.
I was also so impressed with the show and honored to be a part of it. You know, I was so impressed with how many different ways there are to really think about regenerative design and designing with nature. And I thought it was very eye-opening, all the different sort of conversations that were happening in that one room, talking about the same thing very differently. For me, it's very eye-opening, and I'm glad my dad is in town. I went right there Saturday.
And Dave.
Oh, I haven't got ready to go see it. But the most important is, you know, thank you for doing it. And, you know, it's really important that we keep on sharing this story and change that's going on in the world, and events like this are so important.
Yeah, I think that we bandy about all these terms, and sometimes we assume the public knows what they are. So I think it's a real good opportunity to sort of educate on it. So I'm going to kick off with Steve Nygren here. And you might see some slides behind as each panelist speaks, and they may or not be relevant to it, but if you have questions on them afterwards, feel free. So for all 5 panelists, I've got 3 questions that we've set up, and then I think for each one, Tiffany is right. After each panelist speaks, we'll open it up for each individual, or do you want to wait until the end to do all questions?
We can wait till the end.
Perfect. All right, so Steve, what does designing with nature rather than designing against nature mean in community design?
Well, it's fun being an interface, of course, because it was Ray Anderson who pushed me into all of this. And Ray brought the Rocky Mountain Institute in when I was trying to figure out how to save the area. And that is when we really started understanding from a community built standpoint. And the Ray asked the Rocky Mountain Institute to bring thought leaders. And so in September of 2000, 23 thought leaders arrived at Serenbe. Bill Browning facilitated that for the Rocky Mountain Institute. And it was the first time I heard about biophilic design. And so this is really understanding that relationship. We were also had become fascinated with England. We'd been traveling a lot to a friend in England at least every year, and how the countryside had a lot of people in the hamlets, villages, and towns. But nature was very important, the common footpaths and how they related. And so we were looking for someone who understood that system, but also understood sacred geometry, which is really the absolute balance of working with nature, something we've really gotten away for. And so they helped me find Phil Tabb, who did his doctorate on the English village system, and he became a sacred geometrist while in England and trained under Keith Gershaw. So from the very beginning, between all these people, we had a group that absolutely understood. And so it was very natural in how you did that. It wasn't a learning, it happened. And it reminds me of when I was hiring a gardener. And it seemed like the perfect person, really knew a lot of things. And I said, well, you know, we're totally organic. And he looked at me puzzled and said, I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. And she says, we're destroying our planet to build and put asphalt on it. It doesn't make common sense.
So how did the financial and developer industries respond to that philosophy? And how, if at all, has that changed in the past 20 years?
Well, they all thought I was nuts. My friends all came out and wanted to know where the marijuana was because they knew I was on something. Luckily, I believed in Midtown Atlanta in the 70s and bought a lot of real estate. This was our restaurants were. And so I leveraged that property to start Serenbe. It became, you know, we just had to do it. And we just put our heads down because really people were trying to talk me out of it. You know, it seemed crazy. Now remember, this is before LEED certification. That was only 20 years ago. We've come that far. And then after the recession, some of those analysts started coming out to see us because it was proven that walkable and environmental communities were the first out of the recession. So everybody wanted to understand what that was all about. And as we see, that was sort of the beginning of the trend. The pandemic has just put a spotlight on it and gas on it. So everything that seemed crazy 20 years ago is now common sense. I mean, this makes economic sense, it's lifestyle sense. And after this last 2 years, the reports are just starting to come back about our health and how all this relates directly to our health. And if there's one thing that's been going downhill every decade, it is the money we're spending on health and our personal health and happiness. And so this is why these things are all so important and so balanced. So it's really come totally full circle from being crazy to, oh my gosh, how visionary this is.
What can we look to in the future for the development world, or maybe Serenbe? I guess sort of like, how are you hopeful?
Well, I'm very hopeful. As you know, Monica, we have to figure out that just this last week, we had 4, maybe 5 development groups or cities, 2 busloads of people, bringing mayors and planners. And this has become some of the things that all this is about. You know, there's a lot of subject, a lot of ways it's very connected. This is why there's probably a slide about, we talked about the silo thinking in biophilic design, which is what we realized it was. And we've got to stop looking at all of these things in silos and decisions. And I'm excited that people are starting to do that, because Serenbe is one of those places that's been, we broke ground 15 years ago. We're further along, so a lot of people are coming. And this is from the Duke and Duchess in Scotland to the heirs to Johnson & Johnson to places in Australia. So I'm very hopeful that people are looking, trying to figure it out. And you see all the things, all the stuff happening, it's all kinds of different things. This is going to be a different world. The young people are making different decisions, and it's the market that always drives it. And they're going to drive a complete different world than we've seen. So I'm very hopeful. You know, there's still a lot to be done. You know, we've tackled a lot of these things. We're dealing, taking the kids and the seniors out of the prisons that we put them in, and have intergenerational living. Now, there's a lot of rules and regulations that stop that. And so, you know, how do we break down these perceived ideas and the systems? But I think if you see what's going on in the interest level, I'm very hopeful. It's going to be a different future.
All right, Brandy. I'm going to start off because I do think the terms are important, but tell us a little bit about permaculture, just in case somebody doesn't understand. But I love, you also kind of have a tagline that it's ecological intelligence. What does that mean? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I love that question. So funny, anytime anybody asks me what permaculture is. So I like to describe permaculture, there are a lot of ways that people talk about it. One of my favorite definitions is applied common sense. So, but the way I like to describe it is through kind of the 3 pillars of a regenerative landscape that we look at. The urban and suburban context specifically for our work, which is managing water as a resource, building soil fertility, and designing plant communities that support the life around us, including humans. So we look to do that in our residential work primarily. The Shades of Green exists to give people the tools to make an impact in their landscapes. It's one of those things that often feels really daunting, and there's this really big existential crisis that we're going through kind of globally. You know, the barreling toward us climate change. And I think that that can be really debilitating a lot of times for folks. And so one of the things that we really try to do is say, it is really big. It's a really big problem. Feels almost intractable. Like you start pulling on a thread and it's so interconnected to so many different things. But we can make decisions in our own landscapes, and we can, you know, grow strawberries. This was one that came to mind because a client recently just sent a photo of a bunny eating strawberries next to their 3-year-old. And it's like, you know, we lived in kind of a concrete jungle before this, and now we have this. And it's just about those like little moments of connection, I think, that really help to build the regeneration. Yeah, and in terms of ecological intelligence, the way I think of that is we don't really need to do much when it comes to design. You know, there's an intelligence that's just inherent in seeds and soil everything, that we can just kind of like get out of the way a little bit and let nature express itself, then we'll do okay. Yeah.
You also encourage your clients to think about climate action landscapes
Mhm.
and how gardens can contribute to protecting biodiversity, like as I mentioned, rather than a high input system.
Mhm.
Tell us how one of your representative projects, which I read quite a bit about, was Phoenix Gardens. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that works with that particular client. It was
Yeah.
a neat story.
Awesome, I'd love to. So that project, it was Gwendolyn and Brennan Washington. So two farmers, they ran a community supported agriculture program on their 2.5 acres in Lawrenceville for years and years. And then they were, I think, in their early 60s when this happened. It was maybe 2010 or 11, I want to say. Their house burned down and they lost basically everything. Tons of trees, the vehicle and the driveway burned to the ground. And they had been, farming on the land for a long time at that point. And they really just took it as an amazing opportunity. It was already called Phoenix Gardens, which I think is pretty, makes me kind of have chills a little bit. But they took the opportunity to just rebuild with the intention of designing for the next 20 or 30 years of their lives. And so where we stepped in is just looking at the overall kind of site configuration and integrating the more traditional kind of like row crop annual production that they were doing with some supplemental perennial fruit and nut and herb and flower production that also boosts pollinator habitat. So a perennial cut flower garden, which is kind of like the front yard curb appeal, but also a supplemental income stream for their farm. And then we also did a lot with rainwater harvesting there. So they were previously, because it's a kind of a suburban area, they were pulling from city water to do most of their irrigation, which is really costly. They had an ag meter put in, but it's still kind of pulling. So what we did is we designed a rainwater harvesting system, active rainwater harvesting into, I think there's 12,000 gallons of tanks. And then those overflow through a series of contoured swales that just distribute the rainwater more evenly throughout the site. So a swale is just sort of like a ditch with a berm on the downhill side that slows the water as it's running down the slope, kind of spreads it laterally. And then it's planted with fruits and herbs and things that are aromatic that help with pest control. And then there's space for some of their more traditional annual crops. Brennan's a prized tomato grower. So
I just think like we can think about that such a thing at our own home. We can think about doing is like really making your landscape. What are you most excited about in this show or in your industry that you kind of gives you hope for the future?
I think I'm really excited that there are more people in our industry doing this. I moved to Atlanta in 2010, and at the time, people were like, what? Permaculture? Food forests? What's all that about? Or pollinator habitat? All of these things. And there have been a lot of folks doing that type of work. I think I don't know, I like to think of it kind of like a forest. Like you have pioneer species that come in and sort of like, evolve sort of like mid-succession. And I think that there's a lot of folks that are doing this and seeing that you can actually make a livelihood from doing good work in any industry.
So you're tasked with really activating this sort of Chattahoochee Riverlands, which is 100+ miles of greenway. I mean, it is the river, but which we think about, which we really probably don't know where it is, which I know was one of your campaigns at one point, which I loved. But tell us about the Riverlands project and who's involved.
Well, the Chattahoochee Riverlands is really a big idea. So the Trust for Public Land, we're about land for people. And we're a national nonprofit, and we've spent the past 30 years in Georgia really buying about 18,000 acres and 80 miles of riverfront along the Chattahoochee River to protect it from really development, but to use it as an ecological function, but really then also for people to enjoy. We're all about getting people outdoors, connecting everyone to the outside. So we have all this land, the National Park Service, the city parks, the county parks, and there's really a nice concentration between Beaufort Dam, which holds back Lake Lanier, through the Metro Atlanta region, the whole way through Chattahoochee Hills and Serenbe and into the Chattahoochee Bend State Park. So we started looking at this 100-mile focus of the Chattahoochee River, and I was hired as sort of, our original mission was really 285 miles, Helen to Columbus. And I said, okay, I can't look at 285 miles every day. I gotta look at only 100. So we narrowed our focus to 100 miles through the metropolitan middle, really where the people are. And the question of what is a Chattahoochee Riverland really became, what is a Chattahoochee Riverland? That was the puzzle. So the first question we asked is so if we're looking at a 100-mile segment through the metropolitan core of the region, we started with a name. Well, first of all, let me just say, I started off my whole first year, I spent talking to people. I already knew Steve Nygren, but I talked to Steve Nygren and then many people. And I learned that there are a lot of stakeholders talking about the exact same things, and their neighbors, or they're just across the river, and they don't know each other. And like, why is everyone telling me, Walt, TPL, about their ideas for the Chattahoochee, about getting more people to it, introducing the region to it, but they're not talking to each other. So the very first sort of success that I had as a program director was I convened the Chattahoochee Working Group, April of 2018. And I had 12 people show up. I invited everyone I talked to, all 150 people I talked to that first year. Invited them all, 12 showed up, and I thought that was a win. I was not sitting alone in a room. But I also hired Sun & Sons, which is a branding firm, to come and help these stakeholders determine what's called this 100-mile segment. Like, we're going to focus on 100 miles, like we should name it. And I wanted them to feel empowered, like, oh, we did something. We had a mission. So they came up with Chattahoochee Riverlands. We didn't know what it was. We just knew that at the time, we knew that the river's hard to find. Too many people would say the Chattahoochee. It's a river, isn't it? Is it in Georgia? It's in Georgia, isn't it? Or they would think that the country singer way down yonder, Alan Jackson, made up Chattahoochee because it rhymed with hoochie coochie. Like, it was the other way around. People actually do sometimes think it's fictional. I've had people a lot of go to Chattahoochee, like, wow, would anyone want to go to Chattahoochee? It's like, dirty, it's gross. Why would you want to go there? Or I'm like, yeah, I see the sign for it every day when I cross I-20. And I don't know what it looks like. I know I crossed it twice a day on my way to work, and I look around, I don't see anything. So the region, the river has a huge PR issue. We decided, I started framing like, well, we need to introduce this region to its river. If we're land for people, let's get the people on the land that contains the river. So we outlined this 100-mile section. We named it Chattahoochee Riverland. We built a tent. We built a big tent and invited everyone in. And then we were very successful. We hired, we won an award, a planning grant award. We built a $1.5 million budget to hire Scape and a bunch of other teams. Scape is a sort of premier landscape architecture firm out of New York. They came to our region, and I made the Chattahoochee Working Group the client. Like, TPL can't own this. The Regional Commission can't own this. Like, we all need to feel like we all are invested in this. So the Chattahoochee Working Group became a client. They directed Scape. The Regional Commission paid the bills. Yay. And 2 years of public engagement and public dialogue and discussion, we kind of figured out what we mean by Chattahoochee Riverlands. And what it meant to us was, we actually started with a goals statement. 8 months into the process, we started with a goals statement. And the goals really defined the Chattahoochee Riverlands as, let's think of it as a greenway. From Beaufort Dam to Chattahoochee Bend State Park, right through 19 cities and 7 counties, let's build a greenway trail. One side of the river or the other, or both. We don't know, near the river, far from the river. We just knew that we were going to do our best to weave it through. We also saw the Chattahoochee Riverland as a Blue Way trail. We didn't have to figure out where the Blue Way was. The Brevard Fault that God, thousands of years, created, the alignment of the river. It's there. The question is, how do you get to it? How do you get into it? How do you get back out of it? Where do you go to the bathroom? Where do you eat lunch? Where do you stretch your legs? Where do you meet friends? Where do you go when you decide, oh my gosh, it's pouring down rain and my kids are miserable, and like, what do I do now? Let's figure that stuff out. Where do I spend the night? Where do I have a picnic? How do you activate and make the Blue Way trail safe, accessible, intuitive? It's it's kind of hard to get into and out of the river right now. So we'll figure that out. And then we also saw the Riverlands, recognizing that we built a lot of subdivisions and airports and sewers and railroad tracks and airports up against the river. We have literally 1 million rooftops near the river, but they're usually separated from the river behind something. So we designed a series of tributary trails that would connect people from where they live and work through that barrier to the river. And then also to the Greenway Trail, we call it the Mainstem Trail, because the whole 100 miles. So that combination of the Blueway Trail, the Greenway Trail, and the tributary trail, and then the destinations that they will inevitably make, such as parks, boat launches, kayak, all that kind of fun stuff. That is what we call the Riverlands collectively. We also outlined early 4 big goals. And I would say we found it very important because these goals really did direct the design. Then we were deciding, well, where is this Riverlands? We used our 4 goals, and the first, they're not prioritized, but we relied on, safe connected corridor. You should be able to find the Riverlands, get on the Riverlands, kind of know where you're going. We had people crossing sewer lines right across the creek. I'm like, why don't we put a bridge there? Wouldn't it be a little safer and a little bit better connected? We have people who get in the river at a boat ramp and don't realize there's not one downstream. How do you get back out? So let's provide all that so that it's safe, it's connective, and it connects these 19 cities and the 7 counties and the neighbors who live across the river from each other, and they can wave, but they can't get to each other unless 20 minutes in the car around. So the safe connective view of the region. And then the second kind of big goal was common ground for all. So we just recognized early, like no matter your age, your background, your ability, your disability, your race, your ethnicity, your hobbies, your likes, your dislikes. We want you to find something to enjoy about the Riverlands, to feel welcome there, and to come and bring your friends, your family back often. And then the third big idea talks about a living legacy for the future generations. Just recognizing all the 6,000 years of human civilization along the river and how different people in different eras have seen the river differently. So think about like the Native Americans who saw it in the transportation corridor. They saw it as a national boundary between the Creeks and the Cherokees. They saw it as a meeting space because there was a national boundary. That's where they could meet for trade. They caught food out of it. They built fish weirs and they pulled fish out of the river. So they used it one way. And then think about like the early American settlers saw it as a barrier. How do I get my horse and wagon across this darn thing, right? They saw it as a barrier. I thought, oh, darn it, and as a hazard. Right. The Industrial Revolution saw it as a source of power, but also as a sewer. Let's generate our power. Let's, spend some cotton and make some bricks and do all kinds of fun stuff. Let's just dump our garbage in it. We're done. And then use the suburban, saw it as golf course and cul-de-sac and prime real estate for the homes. And industry, the industrial corridor. And then in the 90s, we really saw it as a battle cry for restoration, ecological restoration. Like we've ruined this thing, we've hit it, we've polluted it, let's clean it up. And we as a region, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper and others have cleaned up the river. It's healthy, but it's been in decades and generations. And then the fourth kind of big goal talks about the ecological refuge for the region. Let's make sure that as we activate, my job is to activate and conserve the river and its valley. And on my interview, I was like, those are going to be inherently in tension. As you bring more people to this ecological resource, many will think like, well, they're going to ruin it or degrade it. And that is often the case. So we see ecological refuge for the region as really a guiding light principle. It said that as we bring more people to the river, let's do so in a very ecological sensitive way. Let's make sure that we improve the ecological function of the valley and that we remove the invasive species, that we reconnect the wildlife corridor. Think about how the birds get through Atlanta, the migratory patterns. They're not going to the mall, they're going up the river, right? So the river is a key green space for migratory. So let's refit that back together, all of them.
All of them.
Yeah, not flamingos. Geese, they fly right up it, right up it. Yeah, north in the summer and south in the winter. So let's make sure that we restitch that function of the river. Let's return all that stormwater that we're just dumping into the river and let's let it soak in the ground, recharge the groundwater. So 4 big goals, and then we use those goals to really develop 100-mile long, extra 125 miles of greenway trails. I don't know, a whole bunch of 40-some tributary trails, river crossings, boat ramps, kayak launches, parks, and all collectively is what we call the Riverlands. It's a big idea, And that's
You
why
have
we
the demonstrations, you have multiple sites that you can take it to the website, there's a lot of collateral over here. I'm very impressed with all the work you guys have done. But there are some demonstration sites, one in particular, will you tell us a little bit about kind of how that comes together and where you are in the process and can we access it?
Yes, yes, and yes. So as we published this book in 2020, in April of 2020, this is the Riverlands Book, and it's a gorgeous book that's put together for us and for our region. And you can look at it online at titusriverlands.com, and you can even download and print your own copy, or you can buy a copy, but they're a little spendy. So as we worked from field planning, and we identified all this richness of wonderful projects, and we had the city of Roswell already said, all right, we're going to build our section. And Peachtree Corners is like, we're going to do our tributary trail. And City of Johns Creek was like, we've got Collie Creek Park, and we're going to go to the Evans Bridge Union. So we had a lot of people, all 19 cities, 7 counties, stepping up to do parks. PPL saw ourselves as a champion of the Riverlands, or we don't own it, it's not ours. Everyone will do their part, but we're going to help with the jurisdictions that aren't quite there or that need that kind of help. So we partnered early with Cobb County and City of Smyrna, and we identified a pilot project site where we had worked on it during the Riverlands study. But we're trying to build sort of a miracle 2.7 miles on Cobb County. It's over by Riverview Landing, just across from the Fulton Executive Airport. I brought a hand out here, good stuff. So, and here it is.
You want to pass it around?
Yeah, sure, we can pass around the book. So we are partnering with the county and the city to build 2.7 miles, which we call the Chattahoochee Riverlands Showcase Project, and that would be the Greenway Trail. We're partnering with the county to build a 4-mile tributary trail along the Parkway that would connect the Silver Comet Trail to the Chattahoochee Riverlands, going through industrial areas, through Discovery Park, which actually has old Civil War embankments on it, which were called Pades, through Maxim Crane, which is a big industrial site, up through Riverview Landing. If you've not been to the new Riverview Landing on Riverview Road in Cobb, City of Smyrna, it's a new development up there. Pretty impressive. They have 300 apartments open. They've got a coffee shop. By the way, one of the things we realized during the Riverland study, as many people who wanted to like go kayaking and paddling and hiking and mountain biking and horseback riding and camping, as many just were like, I just want to sit and have a cup of coffee, right? I just want to watch all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In the 100-mile segment, before Riverview Landing opened, 2 years ago? Before that, there were 3 spots in the 100 miles where you could sit and have a cup of coffee or a meal or a drink. It was raised on the river. Chattahoochee Coffee Company in the back of that apartment complex. If you know how to get in, and you're diligent, you can get in. And free. So this one, you can now get a beer, a barbecue sandwich, or a cup of coffee and enjoy it watching the river. So the nice thing about the showcase project is we really think that as we build the trails and the boardwalks and the wetland get down, which lets people kind of get off the main trail and go and step into, on a platform above the wetland and look at the snails and the peepers and the tadpoles and all the fun stuff that's growing all around us. That we will elevate people's idea of like we are living in a natural world, and let's protect it and stay on our trail. But it includes about $1 million worth of restoration of the wildlife habitat and of capturing stormwater off those huge industrial complexes that are now just shooting across the land. So we call it the Riverlands Showcase. It's in Smyrna. It's a $43 million project. And TPL has committed to 18.1 million of that through a philanthropic lift. We've given ourselves 5 years. We started the clock a year ago, so oops, down at 4. We're at about 15 million. So we've got about 3.1 million left to go. So if anyone brought your checkbook and you're feeling a little generous, it's trust for public land. So we hope to have the whole thing open in 4 years from right now. And what we hope that it will do is we want to demonstrate how those 4 big ideas are articulated on a real site, and we also just can say, oh my gosh, that's what a river is. It's like in it now, and I want that in my neighborhood. It's kind of what the Beltline did. The Beltline built that East Lake Trail. It's about 2.7 miles from Piedmont Park to Inman Park, and people are like, the Beltline, yeah, I want that, I want more of that. So, I mean, they didn't make up that idea, but we need that happen.
Yeah, and then sort of my final question is, thinking about, how do we get society to demand more of these things?
Well, I will say, I think there's a lot of ways, right? I think first of all, you really need to build a big tent. If you have a great idea, one lone neighbor tilting at the windmill becomes the kook, right?
Steve?
The old kook. No, but you make friends early. Like you sold the idea, you sold the vision, and people bought into it, and they helped. So, we started the Chattahoochee Working Group, like I said, 4 years ago, and we make the Chattahoochee Working Group. This is like environmental organizations and active and park systems, and you have those difficult conversations. But the nice thing is, everyone feels a sense of ownership. So it's, I'm very, very careful that it's not the Trust for Public Lands, Chattahoochee Riverlands, and I do have marketing people in our San Francisco office like, ooh, the TPL Riverland. No. It's the region's Riverlands, right? So we have to be very careful to not try to claim too much ownership, to build a big tent, to get everyone's ideas incorporated however you can. The other thing is, a lot of designers, and I'm a landscape architect, I went to university and I graduated thinking I was going to build some ivory tower and redesign the world. I learned very quickly that you've got to be a good listener as a designer. When you're designing in a natural environment and in any environment, really, I think too many designers are not open to outcome. Like you have to do public engagement, so you go through the paces, and then you say, okay, but I know better than you, and I'm going to just tell you what I think you should do. You really have to be open to outcome. You have to listen, and you have to be willing to give control to the people you're trying to stakeholders, to the end users. And I think that one of the nice things about the Chattahoochee Riverlands is really so many people feel like they own it. And that's great. And if they all feel like they own it, they'll all do their part to build it, and they'll all do their part to steward it. And we really think that the Beltline, that the Chattahoochee Riverlands will do for the metro region what the Beltline has done for Atlanta. It's about 3.5 Beltlines, but if you can picture the Beltline and the Silver Common Trail have a baby along the river kind of thing, that's what people are kind of aiming for. So the nice thing is, in terms of getting more things, I think when you're trying to do something good, don't try to go it alone. Try to get your community, your family, your people together, and be really respectful of everyone's opinions, and try to build everybody's ideas. And even if you're not sure how you're going to do it, just acknowledge that we are better as a community than I am as an individual. And if you understand that, you will go far.
All right, David. Speaking of designers, so Biophilic design is really breaking out and having its moment right now, if you will. I did not go a day that I did not get an alert that there is an article, right? Whether that's in Vogue or Elle or an interiors publication, but it's everywhere. So as a pioneer in the field, somebody who Biophilia, Biophilic design, Biomimicry, also amazing, huge champion. What's the importance of this movement? And I'll call it a movement rather than a trend, of the public waking up. What does it mean to you who've been talking about this for years?
Oh, what it means. I have to go back and talk about how I got into it. It was in 1994, we took Interface on as a client to design Coppertop. They were struggling at that time, and they brought a new CEO in to run the business. Ray Anderson kind of moved away from running the operation, and we came in to start to turn this company around, just get profitable. And that was 94. And then as Ray was having all this time, suddenly he got this sustainable vision, the spear in his chest, the change. And so for the next probably 2 or 3 years, we kind of just did our job and kept quiet and let Ray do his speaking, and everybody thought he was crazy. Keep him away from the analysts. All those things were going on at that time. After about 3 years, 1997, they had an event in Hawaii. They put it on. It was huge, a global meeting, and they had the best minds in the world on sustainability and environmental. Paul Hawken, Amory Lovins, Bill Browning, etc. One after another. It was, I think Paul Hawken said once that it was like you were starting a football team in the NFL and you were the only team and you could recruit anybody else you wanted. There was no other competition. So Ray had these unbelievable minds. And I sat in the back of that meeting. There had to be 1,000 people there. And I knew then I either needed to find a new client to work for or change my mind of how I was going to design. I probably read 100 books on green design, sustainable design. And in end of 1997, Paul Hawken suggests I read Biomimicry. And I read that book. And also my background, excuse me, I was born in England, lived in the countryside, played, outside in the woods every day. I was so connected with nature. And I read Biomimicry, and it really made a difference to me. It was the book saying, now we don't need to take from nature, we need to learn from nature. And there was one chapter in the book, and how would nature make things? And it just made it so simple for me, because nature makes the shape it needs. There's no waste on the factory floor in nature. It's going to take us time to get there. But, like 3D manufacturing or 3D printing will be closer to how nature makes products than what we've done in the past, how we've carved away the shape that we need and left all that waste on the factory floor. So anyway, we got started, read the book, immediately called Janine and said, we need to meet. We set up a meeting, I think 1998, had the first workshop at our studio. It was the first biomimicry workshop. And she came to, we had designers, we had people from manufacturing, we had marketing, we had a whole group of people. And she took us outside and she said, thank you, how would nature design a carpet tile? And we looked at each other, really didn't know what to do. Eventually, we started to understand some of the principles of nature. Whether you're looking at stones, leaves, bark, anything, it's diversity. Everything is different. It's not like we have, as far as humans, sameness, monochromatic. And we've been, I'm going to stand up, please. And we've been making products, especially before all this happened, that we would make carpet tiles, that every carpet tile looked exactly like the other carpet tile. It was perfection. But nature doesn't have perfection. And we decided to try and make a product that would come out different in design and color in each carpet tile. And we didn't know what we were doing then. And we made the first trial and we laid it on the floor. And first it looked great, just as everything in nature looks. We could randomly put it on the floor. We could change it. We found out that we would save on waste factors from our suppliers because we didn't have to have perfection die lots that would have to be matched perfect. This whole thing of perfect is a human thing that we keep striving for, and sometimes it's unattainable. So suddenly we put it on the floor. Installers could just lay it randomly. They needed less carpet to fill a room. All those Waste factors came after our process. Anyway, that was the whole concept of the product. It got recognized in New York Times, Smithsonian, Fast Company, whatever. But it was the biggest breakthrough. And probably now, I would say 70% of interface this product, even this product on the floor, you can look, it has diversity from one tile to another. You pick one up, replace it, and put a new one down. So that's how the whole concept, and we became great believers in biomimicry. Janine then introduced us to E.O. Wilson, who came to Pond Studios and introduced us to Biophilia. Now, Biophilia now is completely different than biomimicry. The way I separate the two, biomimicry is more about the science of how we make and build things. Biophilia is how we feel about something, the space. And there's enough scientific evidence that we go to all the places that you build and we feel good. And we need places like that to go to. But we need our built world to get closer and closer to what you have. So our studio, picture there, we are close to nature. Even building this studio, for me, I didn't know what I was doing. Again, 1997, the same year as I started to think that I'm about to be sustainable. I got a local architect who came from South Georgia to design it. And she gave up her job in Chicago to design this building. I had no idea what I was doing. I was the client. And it was, if you don't need it, don't put it in. I mean, the things of the nails holding the roof, I thought we would have ceiling tiles, sheetrock, and she said she was way ahead of her time. Even the sprinkler system, I said, are we gonna, the rust, are we gonna paint it? She said, rust is a nice color, leave it. All these things of just simplicity, and if you don't need it, don't put it in. But the connection with nature, she cried every time a tree came down. We are settled in like a little tree house now. It affects everybody who works there every day, and it makes a difference in our work. We need spaces that are connected. In the past 2 years, I think there's been a big shift in the thinking of space. The space of outside and inside are really starting to combine. We're starting to use more outdoor spaces at home, restaurants, work. The outdoors is going to be a big important. And the indoors, the biophilia feel of that has got to be as close to outdoors. If it makes us feel good when we walk down the Chattahoochee, we need that same feeling as we are in a building. That's what we have to strive for. So I think I've been rambling a bit for biomimicry and biophilia, so.
That's great. And you, I mean, I think it has changed. I think COVID has brought everybody a lot closer to the concept of how much we need nature and how important community is. You've been watching this trend, but do you feel like you've seen the changes with floor where we're not thinking about waste anymore? Interface has a big thing about factory as forest, which I love. Some of the tiles now are net negative carbon, which is amazing. But are you hopeful that you're seeing what's going on, that it doesn't just become a thing, doesn't become just a trend?
No, we're so far down the road now. And you mentioned waste factor.
Mm-hmm.
Waste is probably our biggest problem.
Mm-hmm.
We waste more food in this country than most other countries consume. We waste so much, and if we could just eliminate that waste, we wouldn't be kind of in this problem. Now, when we first started, again, we looked at our product of the embodied energy that made nylon. And there was a report from a New Zealand university, and it gave a list of all the elements that were used in any interior. So whether it's wood, plastic, steel, fabrics, it was a list of hundreds of products. And right at the bottom, not quite the bottom, aluminum was at the bottom, carpet nylon was right there, was the most embodied energy product that you could put in any building. So suddenly, we're making the worst fiber or material in our product. And then also you talk to the scientists back 20 years ago and they say, you can't recycle type 6/6 nylon, it's impossible. So what are you gonna do? We can't switch back to wool. A lot of people think wool is a natural, sustainable product. Yes, it is, but for only a small portion of the population. We have outgrown the carrying capacity of the earth to live off the earth. We can take all natural products and make carpet and furniture, all those things. It's impossible. In fact, New Zealand, they have most of the wool that goes into carpet. And these are, I don't know about the numbers. I think if they have 3 million people, 6 million sheep, X amount of water. We can't think about changing Georgia. All the carpet companies, I started to figure out how many sheep we're going to need in Georgia for all the carpet companies. It just went crazy. So what we have to do is, with Janine, was we have to learn how nature is. So we started recycling just industrial waste and putting like 10% of that in the product. And then our suppliers started to make breakthrough, and we started to pit one supplier against another. And who would give us the most recycled content in their product got the next product introduction. And we would go back and forth until we had one company in Italy, Aquafil, who have become dear friends and partners with us. Eventually, in 2011, broke the barrier with post-consumer, fishing nets, and old carpets. And since 2011, probably 90% of the products we have now, it's waste. Sometimes I forget what we're standing on was waste carpet and fishing nets. And you look back now, just 20 years, we didn't think we could get there. And I think the numbers on interface, I know floor is like 99%, 100% recycled, and on the commercial, we're about probably 70%. I would have never dreamt that would have ever happened. But, and also, I have to say, this company who focused on nylon for interface now sell to Adidas, Gucci, Stella McCartney. There's a furniture company in New Zealand. Suddenly, the development is spreading through other industries now and becoming very common. And now we're seeing everybody on the bandwagon of using waste, and it's not going away.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Well, you kind of hit my last one of what are breakthroughs with textile design and how will that impact our future. But I'll try to turn it around a little bit and just say, you know, I think all of these have been common sense solutions. What's next for interface? Like, so we're using post-consumer waste to build things, which we should all be thinking about. We're probably going to think one day that it was ludicrous to take, you know, these pristine natural resources and turn them into a product. But what's next?
What's next? Oh, I wish I knew what was next. I know that interface is going to continue. They measure their metrics every year. Sometimes things come in waves and sometimes in ripples. There are big changes that happen. Some breakthroughs, whether it's on the backing or the kind of the filler that holds the product together. They just have this DNA of just making it better and better. And the most important, and we talked about our supply chain, we're all in this together. Interface cannot do it on their own. They need their suppliers, manufacturers, specifiers, end users, all together, we're in this together. And we can't have one company, one industry. We all have to do this together. So I know Interface will continue leading the way, teaching others. So I'm very optimistic for the future.
Do you want to open it up to the floor for questions from here, and then we can see if there's anybody online that also might have?
Sure. Absolutely.
So I'll open it up. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask the panel? Any questions?
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure.
I was thinking of that answer. So, you know, nature has two really key strategies called economy of materials and economy of energy, which I think we also should do that, right?
Yeah.
So the way they do, nature does economy of materials, like one way is hierarchical structure. So like there's voids and stuff. And then energy savings like the whale with the pumps gets energy. That I think is the next step. To make that part work too.
Well, we need, what you have is we need lots and lots of biologists to
Yeah.
help us.
Sure.
So every company, every industry needs to hire lots of biologists to ask nature, how does nature do it?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where you could find them.
Any other questions? What you have, these amazing panels?
Yeah, I have two really, actually. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Right here.
Right.
Okay.
This owl like responds to motion.
That's called an owl?
Yes.
Oh.
It's totally fine if it doesn't pick you up. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So the first one was just about, just thinking about like, let's say all of Midtown, all of Atlanta. How can an existing city actually incorporate biophilia, biomimicry? It's something that's already established, slowly, I imagine, reform to something that is more efficient like that.
I think the old Fourth Ward Park is a very good example.
You need it or not?
If you look at the old Fourth Ward Park, it's a great example. And if, can any of you imagine how the raindrop that falls on your house finds its way to the tributary of the river? Few people can trace that route. And imagine if our city planners started changing the regulation. Everyone who builds housing knows what they have to do for the automobile, how much asphalt, how many turn lanes, how many parking spaces, and there's nothing for the pedestrian. And if we had a regulation that if you were building housing, you had to plan on your property and demonstrate how it gets to natural nature. Now that's not a park. Your only natural nature, or the key natural nature that everyone has, is your tributaries. We buried them, they're in pipes. And if we start daylighting those, we're going to have a network of green throughout our urban areas. And over the next 20 years, if we just change that, a lot of our infrastructure in the older cities are failing and it has to be replaced. And that's what happened with Old Forest Ward. It's a great example. You know, they were going to replace failing infrastructure with more pipes and more underground. And if that had happened, it would probably still be parking lots today. And it costs less money. Actually, it turned out to do it that way. It's a huge asset for the city. And I'm trying to get Atlanta to do a white paper on how to change the tax base within 5 blocks of that. So it makes a lot of sense for your human health, for financial for the city, and there's no reason not to do it. You know, all cities need to put their parks department and their stormwater department under the same folks, so they're all communicating, because they can really work one in one. How many parks along the river did we find that the stormwater actually was controlling green space right on the river? And then to get them to, you know, wrestle that away and look at how it works. So I think that's one of the biggest things. It's a matter of regulation.
Good. You have one more question?
Yeah. Yeah, so this one's actually, I think you kind of answered part of this already too, but when I've thought about like builders, either in let's say midtown more commercially or residentially, a lot of times they don't use any of these sort of recycled materials or do something really smart that people are coming up with to be more in tune with everything. And I've heard that one of the main reasons is they just don't know. Or if you tell them on the side later, they're like, well, this would be crazy expensive. Why would that make any sense? So how do you see that actually expanding over time so it becomes just part of how things are done?
About 4 years ago, 5 years ago, Urban Land Institute invited me to their conference in Dallas. And my subject was what's the premium of building sustainable? And of course, my whole presentation was the savings to build sustainable. And so I think more and more projects that any of us do, especially in the built environment, to show the economics of it. That's what starts turning the wheels on the development, and then the demand. You know, start asking if your house is certified. There is not a Fortune 500 company that will not build a certified building. And so that's really changed because they know the market isn't going to rent. It's not going to have resale if it isn't certified. So the market changes it as well as the changing that whole idea that it costs more.
Yeah, I was just thinking from the landscape perspective, I think one of the big things is just a fundamental switch in the way we think about natural like spaces and resources on a site. So like for instance, water, like the primary directive in most building codes is to treat it as a nuisance. So it just comes off of your house, it goes into the stormwater infrastructure, and then it becomes a problem for cities to manage. And constant, you know, more development, more impervious surface means more stormwater runoff, which means issues for rivers and all kinds of things. So, you know, just reframing that to, it's a broken kind of like a linear economy. We send all the water away and then we have to turn on the tap to irrigate our lawns and plants and all these things. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So I think reframing and thinking of the assets that we have and how we can kind of send them through with water specifically. You know, one of the things that we focus a lot on are just rain gardens and trying to like dance the water through the landscape so that it can infiltrate into the soil and replenish groundwater and support plants, and then build the soil's capacity to hold water so that when we do have these hot, dry summers, you're not having to irrigate as much. So I think a big piece is just reframing. And then one of the things that we've moved toward a lot is just constantly thinking about how we can use repurposed materials within landscapes. And part of that is redefining, I think, what beauty is to some degree. Yeah, because, you know, people have these ideas of like, oh, it has to look this way or that way in order for it to kind of like fit the standard. And I think that one of our jobs that's really important is to reframe kind of how beautiful natural systems are and the health and like vibrancy that you get from those. So, you know, some of the things that we've been doing is we are moving away from using any mined stone in our landscapes. So really common in landscape practice, you know, go to the quarry, go to the landscape supply, get your river rock. Where did that come from? It just magically appeared, you know, or your granite, all the different sizes. So we've been moving toward, in partnership with Metro Green Recycling, we use them a lot. They do concrete tumbling. So we're moving toward using all recycled concrete in like, you know, creek beds and drainage and all the things, patios. We also kind of have a closed loop system within our own business where we take out a lot of concrete just by the nature of the type of work that we do. So we cut it and we store it at our site, and then we reuse that for patios and pavers and retaining walls. And we have a community hub where in our neighborhood where we collect boxes from all of the businesses as long as they don't have the glossy paper on them. And we use that instead of wood paper to do sheet mulching for all of the landscaping that we do. So I think that there are ways that we can get kind of creative, you know, and reframe also, you know, beauty, what's a nuisance versus what's an asset, and where things are coming from a little bit. And, you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of times people kind of give pushback like, oh, that's not economically viable. So you have to go get the cardboard, or you have to go get the concrete, you know. But I think it's just like a lack of imagination.
I think, you hit on something really, really interesting about redefining what beauty is. Think about, I have a house in the gardening district, I let my lawn, I didn't let it, I fostered it into clover. Because we read about how few bees there are and how few pollinators there are. I'm like, okay, I had a little clover patch. I'm like, I bet you I can get that to spread, and I did. And my neighbors are all like, God, since you bought your house, you really let the lawn go to hell. It's gorgeous. I mean, I take photographs of the house, and I have pollinators buzzing around and all that stuff. But it's sort of like having sort of backbone to say, like, this is beautiful, and you need to either recognize this beautiful or just leave me alone. But the Beltline has the same problem. The Beltline wanted this arboretum, they wanted this wildflower meadow, and then Trees Atlanta was under a lot of pressure because the wildflower meadow wasn't pretty every single day, because nature has seasons. We all know this. So they're trying to like pull weeds out of the meadow, and they're trying to insert to make it look like what they think the human, well, not what they think, what the public wants to see. And some of them are just like, well, some of the public, well, can't we just mow it? Can't we just mow all those weeds? And so the Parks Department has to mow the weeds. Can't we round it up? I guess I'm round up, I can do some roundup. But it's a real struggle. Like, the natural environment is beautiful, and you don't have to weed your meadow. Nature makes a beautiful meadow all on her own. Mow it once a year and it'll be gorgeous. More so during certain seasons. But sort of redefining what beauty is and what the expectation is, I think, and how, my neighbors all, but how much, I mean, I see them with their true green trucks pulling them every month and spraying whatever the hell that is on my grass. And like, I'm like, God, I hope that's all gonna end in the river, and your kids are crawling around there, your dog is rolling around. Like, how do you do that to your lawn? It's because it has to be pristine and green at all times. And I'll say my lawn is pristine and green, and sometimes it's in flower. I don't know, I think redefining beauty. And, Serenbe has done a great job of redefining beauty. What green lawn?
So that, I think it's massive.
Yeah.
Because that's the big thing. And one of my favorite stories that because we don't allow lawns, and the real estate company said you could never sell a house south without a lawn. And one of my favorite stories about, well, it was pre-pandemic, time goes fast. So I want to Atlanta had one of the big national landscape conferences, and they did a post trip to Serenbe. So a whole, 2 busloads of landscape architects from around the nation, and I'm walking about 45 minutes into it, and they're going in on, and I said, well, what's the biggest change you see in this street? And they were guessing the granite curve, the custom lights, all sorts of things. And I said, now, over 50 national landscapers. And I said, did any of you notice there are no lawns? And they looked at each other in total surprise. And so that, now, if it had just been one, like your lawn, then it looks strange because it's out of place. But if you could do entire streets and landscapes, people literally don't notice.
I think it's also symptomatic of just our disconnection from nature. Like, I think, in kind of the built world, we think of it as mostly just an aesthetic function and not much more than, what you were saying, redefined beauty is. You're looking around with your eyes open, like the lawn's not going to be green year round, and some pushback recently about I don't want just sticks in the wintertime. Like, well, that's what a deciduous forest is. So, I think it's just kind of like a symptom, just that disconnection. And I think our work is really to try to foster as much connection as possible so that you can kind of start to see what's the point.
Well, I think we can see change. I mean, COVID redefined work, for better or worse. It redefined clothing, people live in sweats now, redefined gray, it redefined makeup. I mean, I think it can change, and, hopefully it doesn't take a pandemic to do it, but I do think popularizing those things or demonstrating them is what's really, really important. So I know there was one more question back here. You have 2 more? Yeah.
You've already sort of answered what I was gonna ask, but, so we use biophilic guidelines to make natural playgrounds for children. And I can't tell you how many people look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, you don't understand, we want that rubber, we want that steel, because we don't want to have to mess with it. We want to put it in and then 20 years from now, buy a new one. So how do you get from, oh, people think you're crazy to, oh man, you gotta go to Serenbe? It's just like, you know, it's, you know, I mean, how do you?
Keep doing what you're doing and dancing and you're crazy.
Okay, darling, I will.
But the most magical playgrounds, having two kids who are older now, are the ones that are natural, that are, you know, gorgeous. Like San Francisco waterfront is doing an insane one right now. Portland, Oregon, and the Hood River has a beautiful one. You know, we became aficionados, you know, as a parent, and the ones that are natural.
Yeah. Kids like them much.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in on what natural playgrounds all, or? I know there's one more question back there.
So my question is, how can we use designing with nature or permaculture to sustain our daily lives? And I mean by that, like growing food and using less power, like electricity and stuff like that. How can we create a more sustainable environment for humans in that sense outside of aesthetics?
Yeah. A little bit. I think the building side of it I'll defer. But I mean, from the landscape side, you know, it's really interesting because I think a lot of permaculture, kind of the reputation is really about growing, you know, all of your own food on your own land, you know, and I moved to Atlanta from Asheville. People are really into homesteading and growing a ton of food, and they have more time than money most of the time. So one of the things that I noticed moving to Atlanta is the inverse of that is true. People don't have much time and they want to like hire people to help do that, but not from the perspective of like trying to grow everything. I think it's trying to like rekindle some lost connection, you know, like you move to the city, you've got work, all of a sudden you have family, kids, all the whole kind of like train is moving kind of thing, you know, and I think it's really easy to feel really disconnected from our food in that scenario. And so a lot of our clients, it's really different. Like people that I worked with in Nashville, they really wanted a lot of food systems. And here, I think a lot more people ask for like maybe some space to grow some veggies, but really just like, I want to go outside and I want to gather some herbs for dinner, or I want to harvest blackberries in the summer or blueberries. So we lean more toward kind of like edible landscaping and thinking about kind of like some of the structures we see in landscapes, like certain percentage of evergreens and foundation plants and things like that, and replace them oftentimes with things that are either useful or native that are also employing like methods for regenerating soil and using plants that have a lot of kind of functions for soil health and the biodiversity. And then the food, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot at Shades of Green is food is part of it, but however people find their inroad into like being in their landscape is really important. So some people are really passionate about like songbird habitat, and other people are really passionate about bees, and other people are really passionate about growing food with their children and their families. And so it's kind of all of those things, I think, in this specific context. And then when you get outside of kind of the urban and suburban context, I think it can shift, you know, into, you know, regenerative farming. And there's so many like really beautiful ways of kind of incorporating regenerative practices for massive, you know, larger scale production. But
I'm not sure what to go.
The interface that's building itself is an incredible example of, you know, energy and water usage. And so, I mean, the built environment, I can speak from a little bit of Serenbe, like all of our homes are Earthcraft certified. South Face is a company here in Atlanta that will certify your home. And they'll also come and, talk to you and do blow tests to figure out, what are the energy efficient changes you can make. And so there can be some real simple solutions, or there can be some higher, higher touch, higher economic choices, like putting solar panels on your house, or, when you move to a neighborhood, is it geothermal? Because geothermal is something that, basically, if it's a geothermal well, your home is being heated and cooled by the earth, basically. So you can look for these things, whether that's the company, the building that you're going to be moving into and spending 95% of your time is typically your office, or your neighborhood, or you can start to make small changes on your own to your own house. But I think if we educate people and then we can start asking those questions, it's not so much, is my house, where's the Target? No offense to Target, where, that's where I'm choosing my house, is how close I can get to a big box store. But instead, is there a trailhead? Is there a tributary to the Riverlands? Was it built with non-toxic materials? So I think we need to answer those questions for ourselves.
I read that and historically it shows that 20% of the buildings we're going to occupy in 25 years haven't been built yet. Isn't that amazing? Now, you think about 25 years ago, what buildings were here that you're in. So it's probably true. But a good example is with Bosch, we built a sample house now, gosh, a lot of years ago. And everything is certified because it has to be, and that reduces your demand by 35%. Geothermal, that reduces it by another 30% plus. That meant that we only had to put 1/3 the solar on the house. And so that was 1/3 the cost. It fit on the house, on a 2,300 square foot house. Everyone said, oh yeah, but we can't afford that. So we sold the house after it was open and tour. The people got a 80% mortgage. Now, it was more expensive because of all those things. And all the energy companies talk about the payback, 5 years, 7 years. But when you look at what the increase in their monthly mortgage was for that increased price, it was less than what their power bill would have been. So it was cash positive month one. And those are the kind of things we have to start measuring and looking at. It should be about your cash flow, not how fast your payback is. We're measuring what's not important. The important is your cash flow. And they had more money left over every month for a steak dinner or 3 vegetarian dinners or whatever. But that's what we have to get people to start looking at, including the people producing the products and how they measure and sell it and talk about it.
And the Candida building, I'll give a plug, which is also in the show, is a phenomenal building to go visit. It's on the Georgia Tech campus. And I don't know if anybody's here who can tell us, but I think you can kind of walk in at any time, right?
Yeah, you can walk in any time.
Yeah.
And there's a whole eco commons around it. And the species diversity, they've done a study of it. It's really good. But the building itself, it's amazing.
And we also have sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We also have a tour this Saturday. If you want to sign up on MODA, it's free. So check that out.
And it's a phenomenal building. And there's a really cool Stickworks project outside that's on my. Oh, did you hear that? So the sticks came from Serenbe and from Laboratory, then it built it there, but I think it's called Biophilia blocks. So that's also a fun aspect of visiting Candida. Any final questions?
Any final questions before? Thank you so much, everyone. I'm gonna hand this over to our host.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us, especially our panelists. And we are, on behalf of Museum of Design Atlanta and Interface, we're really excited we got to have you all here today, along with our virtual attendees as well. We encourage all of you all to join us at Museum of Design Atlanta for first Full Circle Design Without End. The exhibition is on now. It's right, if you don't know where MODA is, it's right near us, right on Peachtree Street, across from the High Museum of Art. So please join us there. Many of the things that were discussed tonight are featured. I will plug Interface and Aquafil, which were two of the things that David mentioned, are featured in the exhibit. So we're really proud of that, along with the Chattahoochee as well as many other things. So join us there. Thank you. Thank you. We have refreshments and food right outside. So please join us for some networking. And thank you. Come and see us soon. And there's lots of events on museumofdesign.org like this that you can join. If you become a member, they're all free. So there you go. Thank you.